What is happening, everybody? It is time for the Stokastic, I almost said awesome, Stokastic MLB strategy show. And sorry for a little bit of a late start. We're waiting for the MMA strategy show to finish. And this is also kind of two smaller slates today. So we've got two 4-game slates, one in the afternoon, one in the evening. So what Adam and I are going to do here is we're just going to go through all of these games, game by game, all 8 of them. And we'll be talking about these two slates like individually as 4-game slates. If you guys have any questions as we go along, feel free to throw those into the Discord channel and add us, or if you're on YouTube and want to ask questions, that helps as well. 8 games, we're going to be rolling through all of them. Adam, how do you feel about these two separate smaller slates we have?
I wish that it was just one 8-game slate. I mean, not with the way the times are, because that would be a huge pain in the ass, but I just wish the early games started at 7 o'clock.
Yeah, I think this is just the thing where they don't want to compete with college football, if I had to guess, where it's the first I guess sizable college football slate today. I think that's what's throwing off the game times a little bit. I know Thursdays generally tend to be smaller slates anyway, but usually not this kind of spread. I think that's what it is, but who actually knows?
I assumed it was kind of just a quirky scheduling thing. Do they really care about? I mean, are real college football teams playing tonight?
I think so. I'm not positive. I don't know anything about college football. You know who does know stuff about college football, though, is Matt Kajeski. So if you guys want to watch our shows later on today for college football, Matt Kajeski knows everything about preseason football, NFL, college football. So we'll have that covered. So if you guys like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can check that out later. But yeah, I assume that there's normal college football today.
I'm going to go with it just being a quirky schedule because it appears based on ESPN, the only top 25 teams playing today are Oklahoma State against Central Michigan, who isn't ranked, Pitt, West Virginia, and Wake Forest VMI. I can't imagine baseball scheduling around that.
All right. Yeah, probably not. Could just be baseball coming up with a dumb schedule. There's games starting at 6 Eastern time, and then a bunch of afternoon games, which are also kind of spread out. And we'll start talking about those games right now, beginning with the Seattle Mariners against the Detroit Tigers. And we have one of the more popular pitching options for the early slate going in this game, Logan Gilbert, who has been a little bit disappointing for the year because I thought he looked great last year in his rookie season. I thought that he was headed towards being a top of the rotation pitcher. He hasn't been bad this year, but 4.27 expected ERA, 21.3% K rate. Based on his stuff, I thought he'd be striking out more guys this year, but he has a really, really good matchup against the Detroit Tigers. So how are you going to be handling him today?
Yeah, the strikeout percentage this year has been a bit underwhelming, like you said, at only 21.3%. But still a solid enough pitcher, 3.97 xFIP, 3.72 FIP, allowing about a home run per 9, doesn't walk a lot of guys. And like you said, a really good matchup against the Tigers, also a short slate. So I think he looks really good here. You're also getting a reduced price tag. I mean, this is a pitcher that at times in the past has been mid 8Ks, I think even mid 9Ks at times. So still a good pitcher, just a little bit underwhelming in the strikeout department, but that's not too much of a concern here against the Tigers. Looking at the top pitchers tool, which just froze on me. We have Gilbert projected for a 27% chance of being a top 2 pitcher at 46% ownership, but that top 2 percentage is going to come up too because we currently have Clayton Kershaw over projected. So Kershaw, who is leading the way there, is going to come down, and Gilbert, as a result, will probably go up.
Yeah, and I was just messaging with Sean, who does a lot of our baseball projections. Sean's on. I'm sure you guys have seen him at the top of MLB leaderboards, and he said there's a little bit of a bug right now in the early slate projections that they're working out, and I think a lot of it is because of Clayton Kershaw and him coming off the injured list. So to what Adam said before, that is something that's going to be updated fairly shortly per the message I just got. So as of right now, when I look at Logan Gilbert, I think he's pretty clearly the top secondary pitching option on the early slate. But if I'm looking to pivot off of him, Eduardo Rodriguez on the other side of the game isn't a bad guy to go to because I've always believed in Eduardo Rodriguez. I just don't know that there's any pitcher who's been more unlucky over the last few years from a number of standpoints. Number one, his underlying numbers have been considerably better than his actual results for the last couple of seasons. Last year, he had a 4.74 ERA, but a 3.47 expected ERA and a 3.32 FIP. This year, we just haven't seen him pitch that much because he's been hurt. 2 years ago, he missed an entire season because of a heart condition that he developed after getting COVID. So, I mean, I think this is a guy who's probably a lot better than the general public thinks of him as. I don't know where his ownership is actually going to be once we get some of our data updated, but I think he is the lower owned SP2 option I'm going to like going to today.
Yeah, I'm with you. He's been unlucky for years. He did miss a lot of this year. He had some personal issues, missed a few months. He's thrown 78 pitches in each of his last 2 starts back. I don't think that's a hard pitch count because in his last start, he made it through 6 innings. Typically, when I see that, I just assume that he got through 6 innings and that was all they wanted from him. And they went to the bullpen. I think he probably could have thrown more pitches. It's a tough matchup against the Mariners, but at 7,100, I don't have any issues getting there. He does only have a 19.1% strikeout percentage this year. But as I mentioned, it's been, it's a relatively small sample size. It's been a really weird year for him. He's typically a better strikeout pitcher than that. Last season, he struck out 27.4% of hitters. The year before that, or 2019, because he missed 2020 with myocarditis, but 2019, 24.8% strikeout percentage. So dangerous matchup, but I think the price tag accounts for that in addition to it being a short slate.
And then what are we going to do with the offenses in this game? Right now, the Detroit Tigers projected to have the least amount of ownership on the entire slate. They have absolutely sucked against right-hand pitching, but just because of the expected ownership going to Logan Gilbert and this being a 4-game slate, are you going to be looking at Detroit at all for leverage purposes?
I don't really want to get there. I mean, you still have some value on this team with Riley Green at 3,500, Reyes back to being 2K flat. DraftKings had actually gotten him up to 2,300 the other day. But it's not a pitcher I really like to target here. It's certainly not an offense that I really like getting to. This season, Gilbert's allowed a 132 expected ISO to lefties, 183 to righties. It's a 4-game slate, so I'll probably get some, but it's not a spot that I'm actively targeting.
Yeah, and I agree. If I'm getting to them, it's solely because, hey, it's a 4-game slate. If I'm playing 150 lineups, I guess there is some percentage chance that the Tigers would end up being a top scoring team. But with that said, we do them with the lowest top stack odds on the slate, and I do think there's better offenses to get to. So if you're just playing a handful of lineups, Detroit Tigers is not one of the teams that would be in the mix for me. But then on the other side with the Seattle Mariners, I just mentioned that Eduardo Rodriguez has largely been a pitcher that's gotten lucky over the last few years. He is somebody I like in large field tournaments, but we do have the Mariners with the second highest top stack odds on the slate going up against him. So is this a team that we also like getting to maybe a little bit overweight to as a stack, and it makes sense to play both sides?
Yeah, I think so because, you are talking about a version of Rodriguez that hasn't been as good this year. 19% strikeout percentage, 11% walk percentage, 4.6 xFIP, 3.9 FIP. But I think that, there are some concerns here. You're talking about somebody that missed the 2020 season because he was having heart issues. And then, he was still solid last year. This year, he hasn't been that good. So there's certainly some red flags with Rodriguez on top of the fact the Mariners are just a good offense anyway. Right now we have them with the second highest top stack percentage, but we have them at 14% getting 13% ownership. The White Sox leading the way at 22% getting 21% ownership. So pretty big gap between those two teams in terms of ownership.
Yeah, and then could be Travis in the chat saying 3 years of bad luck. Maybe it means you suck. Well, his numbers are really not that bad this year. This year they are okay. He has a 3.6 ERA. Last year, so here's where he's been unlucky. This year, he got normal injured. Last year, he just had underlying stats that were much better than his real stats. And then the year before, he missed an entire season due to a heart condition. So to me, when I'm talking about unlucky, his results aren't that bad this season. I don't think it means that he sucks. And 3 years ago, you can't say that, he missed the entire season. That means he's bad. He literally didn't play. He wasn't good, nor was he bad from a baseball perspective. I would just consider that to be bad luck. He got COVID. It developed into a heart condition. That's not something that's indicative of his baseball career. Maybe is that why his velocity is down this year in part? It's possible. But I still think he's a talented pitcher that we just don't know where he's at right now because we haven't seen him that much over the last year.
Yeah, exactly. We have a track record of Rodriguez being a good major league pitcher for all of his career outside of this year.
Yeah. So I'm looking at him, large field tournaments. He's only pitched 50 innings this year. So I think there's variance. It's one to play both sides of, and I'll probably be overweight to the Mariners as a stack. I'll probably be overweight to Eduardo Rodriguez as well.
Yeah, and he has a full season post myocarditis as well. And, last year he made 31 starts, 32 appearances. He struck out 27.5% of hitters. So it's not like, his numbers this year would be a much bigger red flag if we didn't have last year.
Yeah, and once the point last year was that last year the 4.74 ERA with a 3.47 expected ERA, 3.32 FIP. That's what I'd consider to be a lot of bad luck. He had a 363 BABIP. It's so far out of line with the rest of his career. The rest of his career is a 309 BABIP and has been right around 300 every other year of his career. So it was just some bad BABIP luck last year and then the heart condition the year before. I think he's a talented pitcher. The real question I have right now is just, is he healthy right now or not? And how is his velocity going to look? So It's a high variance situation. It's one to play both sides of on a 4-game slate. Next game here, Kansas City Royals, Chicago White Sox. Daniel Mengen, there's a name from the past. Do you remember? Like, I saw Daniel Mengen's name today, and I was like, I didn't realize this guy was still pitching. He has I assume he still has the crazy mustache. He had the old catfish hunter with like the curls at the end of his mustache. He sucked as a pitcher in the past. So if you're looking at the numbers that are on the screen right now, they're good for this year. But keep in mind, he's thrown a total of 4 innings, and they've all been in relief. And in the past, when we've seen Mengen pitch, he's generally not been good. So my expectation is that this is a guy who, number one, isn't going to work deep into the game. And then number two, is most likely to not be super effective if he is in the game for any kind of extended stretch.
Yeah, I'm not expecting him to be a factor from a DFS standpoint.
Yeah, so he last pitched in the big leagues on June 25th. His recent minor league outings, he did go 6 innings in his last start. So maybe he is a little bit more stretched out, which I actually think if that is the case, that's a little more beneficial for the White Sox. So we look at Chicago right now. They are the number 1 most owned team on the slate while also having the number 1 top stack odds. I think the 21% ownership on them is more or less warranted. The White Sox are a high priority team to get to.
Yeah, I think so too. Mengen just hasn't really ever been good in the majors for his career. 4.52 FIP, 4.89 xFIP, striking out 17.5% of hitters, allowing 1.23 home runs per 9. The White Sox aren't very good right now. I mean, you still don't have Moncada. You still don't have Robert. I know Andrus homered last night, but still not somebody that should ever be leading off for your team. He's leading off again. Gavin Sheets at 2,600, I think, looks very good. And you do have cheap prices throughout this lineup, but I do think it's worth noting that like this lineup sucks. They've been they've underperformed for a lot of the season anyway, based on the amount of talent they have. And then now missing Robert and Moncada. I mean, it's basically Andrew Vaughn, Abreu, Jimenez, Sheets, Grandal, I guess Pollock, but like Andrus, Garcia, Gonzalez, other than being cheap, there's like no redeeming qualities there.
No, the redeeming quality is that Mengen sucks on the other side. That's really what makes them look any bit decent for me today. Steamer's projection on him for the rest of the season has him as being a reliever and a starter, and even with those being split then with a 5.14 ERA and a 4.99 FIP the rest of the season. I hate the White Sox at this point of the year. I literally think they've failed 100% of the times they've been chalk this year. I can't remember a single time that they've come through with any kind of high ownership. But the only reason to get to them, from my standpoint, is that it's not because of the talent on their side. It's because I don't think Mengen belongs in the MLB.
Yeah, I agree with that completely.
So let's talk about the other side of the game there, where we've got Johnny Cueto going up against the Royals. And Cueto's been way more serviceable than I gave him credit for at any point in the season. He has a 3.9 expected ERA, a 15.4% K rate, but he's going up against the Royals on the other side. And the Royals, not only do they have a bad offense since the All-Star break, well, they had a bad offense before that, but even a worse offense post All-Star break. Salvador Perez got scratched from the start last night. I don't know if we have a lineup yet for the Royals, but assuming that there is no Salvador Perez in the lineup, this is no lineup yet. This would be a very easy matchup for Johnny Cueto. So I don't really think I've rostered him at all this year because of his lack of strikeout upside. But how would he look for you on this slate if Perez isn't in the lineup?
He'd look okay here. I mean, I still think it's with or without Perez, I view it as a pretty similar lineup. Obviously, it's better for Cueto if Perez is out. But either way, like you have a lot of young hitting talent that isn't consistently good at the major league level yet. If Perez is in there, obviously it's one more proven bat, but it's still an overall decent matchup for him, one way or the other. He's not a great strikeout pitcher, but he has done a good job limiting power this year, less than 1 home run per 9 innings. Only striking out 15% of hitters, 4.4 xFIP. The price tag, I think, is problematic at 8,900, but with this being a shorter slate and the fact he is projected for a 26% chance of being a top 2 pitcher, 24% ownership, I assume I'll get to him some here just because it is a shorter slate and there's several pitchers that I really don't want to get to.
Yeah, and there are concerns with kind of all of the pitchers here that we have to talk about. So Clayton Kershaw, we're going to bring him up in a second. He's going to be on some sort of pitch count, which is unspecified right now, but he hasn't pitched in a while. It stands to reason that he's going to be throwing limited pitches. Chris Bassett's going up against the Dodgers. We know how difficult of a matchup that is. Logan Gilbert, I think that he's the guy we can feel the best about. Cueto is no strikeout upside. And then Eduardo Rodriguez this year, he's just been hurt and inconsistent. So I think that almost all of these pitchers, other than Logan Gilbert, come with some sort of asterisk attached to them. So with that in mind, I'm okay with paying up for Johnny Cueto because relative to the other options, I think he's at least serviceable.
Uh, yeah, I agree.
And then as far as stacking the Royals against him, is that anything that interests you? I know it's a 4 game slate. We don't have that many options for teams to get to, but the Royals are still projected to be very popular. I know they're a team that you've liked to get to a lot. So I'm curious where you stand on the Royals as currently being the second highest projected owned offense of the day.
Yeah, I think I'll get to him again. Cueto just doesn't strike out a lot of guys, and the Royals have a lot of multi-position eligibility. They're cheap. I'll still get there. Obviously, I prefer them if Perez is in.
Yeah. So, I mean, I wouldn't fade them outright. I do think I'm going to be underweight to them because that is quite a bit of ownership relative to the other teams, 16%. There's other teams that I would prefer getting to than the Royals, especially if Salvador Perez is out. But it's not a team that I think we could totally write off on a smaller slate. Let's go on to the next game now. We've got the Washington Nationals against the Oakland A's. Ken Waldichuk is making his debut for Oakland. What do we know about him, if anything, Adam?
I know he was with the Yankees.
Yeah, he was one of the key pieces that came from the Yankees in the Frankie Montas trade. So if we right now look at his overall pitching acumen in terms of a prospect, he is considered the number one prospect right now in the Oakland organization. He's also one of the top pitching prospects in baseball. In the minor leagues, he has had not great run prevention results. In 11 starts with the Yankees, he had a 3.59 ERA, 3.81 FIP, a ton of strikeouts and a lot of walks also, 34% K rate to an 11.2% walk rate. So I'm looking at him right now at 5,000 against the Nationals as being a pretty good salary saving pitcher. There's a really wide range of outcomes. Pitchers making their debut. There's always a lot that could go wrong, especially a guy who's already had walk issues in the minor leagues. But there's pretty apparent upside in the cheapest starting pitcher of the day.
Yeah, I agree. AAA numbers this year with the Yankees: 11 starts, 4 with Oakland. Struck out 34% with the Yankees, 26.6 with Oakland. So already getting worse with the A's, as players do. But yeah, highly regarded prospect. Fangraphs had him 35th overall, and it's a good enough matchup. It's a short slate. He's only 5K. I think he's a pretty solid option here.
Yeah, I think that relative to the slate where we are kind of struggling with what to do with some of these starting pitchers and nobody looks like a slam dunk, he's somebody else that's going to have to be in the mix just from a price standpoint. And then also his overall outlook as a prospect, which seems to indicate that he has upside. But how do the Nationals look for you going up against him, being that he's a talented pitcher that we just don't really know all that much about?
I think that with it being a 4 game slate and the fact that there is right-handed power in the Nats lineup, getting to them is somewhat interesting. Like, you have Waldichuk projected for 33% ownership. The Nats currently projected for 9% ownership with an 11% chance of being the top scoring stack. So, if I had to pick a side here that I think is more likely to succeed, it's Waldichuk. But given the short slate, the lack of ownership coming into the Nats, the fact that you do have Lane Thomas, Meneses, Voit, Cruz, all from the right side, I am interested in getting to the Nats in tournaments.
Yeah, so I think that we're on the same page there. It's another one to play both sides of, which unfortunately happens a lot on 4 game slates. It's hard to take any crazy stands, be like, this is the stack, this is the pitcher, unless there's, like a DeGrom or something like that on the slate. But the reality is we have a pitcher making his debut who's had walk issues in the minor leagues against a bad offense, but it's still a major league offense. It's a step up in competition for Waldichuk. It's a wide range of outcomes. So I do think that it's kind of unavoidable to also play both sides of this game. And then also Washington, which is, considering I think it's warmer weather today.
Yeah, it's supposed to be like 90.
Yeah. So it's also going to be hitter friendly weather. So I think this could go a lot of ways. Another one to play both sides of. Now, pitching for Washington, we have Paulo Espino. This is a pitcher that I hardly ever roster, but once again, really favorable matchup against the Oakland A's. Espino, though, 4.64 expected ERA, only a 17.8% K rate. What are you going to do with Espino, who's generally not been a good pitcher this year, against the A's, who have been a generally pretty terrible offense?
Yeah, he's one of the guys that I was referring to a minute ago when I said that there were a couple of pitchers that I had no interest in. But I guess realistically, again, 4 game slate, you do have interest at 5,400. He is facing Oakland. Obviously, that makes pitchers better, but not favorable pitching conditions and not a very good pitcher. 220 expected ISO allowed to righties this year for Espino, 164 to lefties, 19% strikeout percentage against righties, 16% against lefties. Certainly not a pitcher I'm going to with any level of confidence. I think the case that you make for Espino is if you have a lineup where, you are playing a little bit more chalky hitters, or if you have a lineup where, for example, you're playing the Nats, although if you're playing the Nats, you probably don't need to pay down. He is getting half the ownership of Waldichuk. I don't think he has nearly the same amount of talent as Waldichuk, but he's probably not a 2-to-1 dog to beat him either.
Yeah. And then as far as the Oakland A's offense goes, how much do you want to stack them up? They are projected for modest ownership. There's a lot of teams that are kind of similarly projected in terms of ownership right now. Close to 13% ownership for Oakland, 13% top stack odds, but they do have the number one top value percentage odds of any team on the slate by a pretty wide margin. I don't know how much we're going to need the salary savings today, but this does look like the best value offense, at least from points per dollar sense.
Yeah, and it's a nice upside spot too. You're getting a positive park shift, getting out of Oakland. You're getting good hitting weather. You're getting a shitty pitcher in Espino. We don't have their lineup yet, but assuming that Shea Langoliers is in at 3K, he's going to look really good. If you have the money, getting Deshaun Murphy at 4,800 looks really good as well. Obviously on FanDuel, you can play them both. On DraftKings, you can only play one. I assume Seth Brown will be back in the lineup. Espino hasn't given up the same amount of power to lefties as righties, but I'll still take my chances on a cheap Seth Brown. Yeah, like the guys that I actually like are the two catchers and Brown, but then the rest of the team is cheap enough that if you need savings, you can full stack them as well.
Yeah, I think Oakland is the team that, at the very least, I'm going to get to them a lot as salary saving plays and maybe like some Dodger stacks or Met stacks. We're about to talk about those teams in a second that have some of the more high upside hitters on the slate just from a name value perspective. And I do think that's where Oakland is going to come in really handy. Some of those bats to help us save salary and still spend up at pitching at some of the more expensive stacks, like the Mets and the Dodgers. And I think where we have to start here is that Clayton Kershaw has not pitched in over 2 months. He was dealing with a back injury. What are we expecting from him coming back after he threw 70 pitches in a simulated game over the weekend?
My expectation is something like 75, 80 pitches. I also think there's a pretty good chance that, I think that's probably where they're not comfortable with him going over. And again, this is me just kind of educated guessing. But then, also, let's say he gets through 5 innings at 69 pitches. Are they going to bring him out for this? I doubt they're bringing him out for the 6th. So that's kind of my expectation is like, if he goes 5 2/3 and gets to 75, 80 pitches, they probably, or I think there's a good chance they go to the bullpen. But you also could certainly get less pitches than that if it's just like, oh, okay, well, he finished this inning at 67. He's probably not going to get the next inning done in 8 pitches. So let's just get to the bullpen. So I'm expecting him somewhere around that 70 pitch mark.
Yeah, 70 pitches, I think, is probably a reasonable expectation. They're definitely going to be cautious with Kershaw. The Dodgers are up. Let's see, what is their lead now in the National League West? Like 16 games, 18 games or something? It is 18 and a half game lead over the Padres. They've won the division. This is they're 90 and 39. What a ridiculous record the Dodgers have right now. There is no need for them to stretch out Kershaw and risk any kind of injury. I think they're going to be very cautious with him. With that in mind, how are you going to approach him in large field tournaments where it's only a 4-game slate? It's realistic to think 15 fantasy points could end up being the top scoring pitcher of the day. So are you going to want to play him in large field tournaments? And if so, how much of them?
Yeah, I mean, a lot's going to depend on the ownership. Right now, we have him projected at 22%. I'm curious to see, have we rerun, actually, do you know if we've rerun stuff for changing his projection yet?
I'm looking right now. I think the answer is no.
Okay, so I'm curious to see, obviously his top 2 pitcher percentage is going to come down since we're basing that on our projections, and our projection is going to come down. I'm curious to see what happens with his ownership, because right now we have him at 22%, and I don't know what goes into our ownership projections, but I do believe in some part our projections play a role. So I'm curious to see if that comes down as well. Because, I mean, at 22%, I still think he's playable just because it's Clayton Kershaw. And like you said, he can get 15, 16 DraftKings points, in 5 innings. And when you look at the other pitching options on this slate, Chris Bassett is good, but he's facing the Dodgers. So it's not like he's a lock to have a good game at all. Gilbert is fine. Cueto's got legit question marks. Rodriguez has question marks. The other 3 guys have major question marks. So it's really conceivable that 70, 75 pitches of Clayton Kershaw is enough on this slate. So still willing to play him. Obviously, ownership plays a really big role here, though, because you do have to keep in mind that from a range of outcomes perspective, he still has a really low floor because every single baseball player always does, but he doesn't have that same level of ceiling where like Chris Bassett, for example, really, really tough matchup for the Dodgers. It's not likely he has a big game, but he's still going to be allowed to go score you 30 DraftKings points if he's just pitching his ass off. Clayton Kershaw can throw the best game of his life, and he's going to be allowed to probably score like 20.
Yeah. And that's one of the things also is, we look at so many of these slates. We think like, oh, 10,500, you need to get like 20 something fantasy points out of Clayton Kershaw. Maybe not on this slate. What happens if Oakland is the highest scoring team and Kershaw's the highest scoring pitcher because everybody's mediocre and Kershaw puts up 15 or 14 fantasy points? He's still probably going to be in winning lineups because salary becomes not an issue at that point. So there's going to be a pitch count restriction of some sort on Clayton Kershaw. I don't think it's going to be prohibitive enough to where I'm not going to play him. So to me, just because the outlook of the slate, I still feel like I'm going to have to get to Kershaw to some extent. But the Mets on the other side, are they a team that we're going to want to stack against Kershaw, considering that it is a long layoff for him and we don't know exactly where he's going to be at?
Yeah, and so we did just get a projections update. Kershaw dropped down to 14.9 DraftKings points. I think that is much more reasonable. Yeah, he's down to a 35% chance of being top two, 21% ownership. So, I mean, with those numbers, I'm going to end up getting there. I may end up with him a little bit lower projected, but either way, like when you compare him to the other pitchers on this slate, Bassett is the highest, but it's we have Bassett by like 0.7 of a point. We have Gilbert by 1/10 of a point, and there's going to be enough hitter value where there's a lot of lineups you can just play Kershaw anyway. So still going to get there. I don't remember your question, but I assume it was about Chris Bassett.
Oh, no, it was about the Mets on the other side going up against Kershaw, just with the uncertainty with Kershaw, both in terms of his pitch count and the long layoff where it's reasonable to think that, hey, he could be rusty and he could just not have his best stuff after the long layoff. Does that make the Mets more appealing than we would normally see a team going up against Kershaw?
Yeah, that, and also when you think about the level of talent in these offenses, Seattle's good. The Dodgers clearly are good. The White Sox, the A's, the Royals, the Nats, the Tigers, the Mets are just on a different level than all of those teams other than the White Sox, and they're certainly better than the White Sox as well. So you have the question mark about what Kershaw is, and then you just also have one of the most talented offenses on the slate, about an 8% chance, about a 7% chance of being the top stack, about an 8% chance or 8% ownership. So I do think that, again, it's just a team where if this were an 8, 9, 10 game slate, I wouldn't be interested. But on this slate at low ownership, I will take one of the best offenses.
Yeah. When it comes to the Mets today, it's a 4-game slate. There's 8 offenses to choose from. It's pretty clear the 2 best offenses on the slate are the Mets and the Dodgers. They also happen to be going up against the 2 best pitchers on the slate in Chris Bassett and Clayton Kershaw. So kind of the same question here when it comes to the Dodgers offense. And then we'll talk about Bassett as a pitcher. What are you going to be doing with the Dodgers, who are very expensive? And now in our latest ownership update, they are now the 3rd most popular offense on the slate going up against Bassett.
Yeah, and clearly the best offense in terms of talent. Tough matchup against Bassett. He is a good pitcher. Ownership on the Dodgers looks like it's coming in about where it should be, but they are expensive as well. Sub 1% chance of being the top value stack. So not that it matters too much on this slate. Like you're not giving up a lot in the way of pitching if you just say, screw it, I'm playing Waldichuk and Rodriguez or Cueto or Gilbert or whatever, and you'll be able to afford the Dodgers. But I do think that they're pretty much getting the correct ownership now, even given the difficult matchup against Bassett. Only a 125 expected ISO to lefties, 124 to righties for Bassett this year. Certainly not somebody that I expect to go out there and pitch poorly, but the Dodgers are extremely good offensively.
And then as far as Bassett goes as a pitcher, he is the 2nd most expensive pitcher on the slate, only behind Kershaw. The matchup is absolutely brutal against the Dodgers. I think I prefer Bassett to Kershaw, though, just because, well, number one, he's pitching at home. That helps a little bit. Then point 2, also, there's no pitch count concern on him like there is with Kershaw, and he's $500 cheaper, which not the pricing matters that much on this slate, but I do think it helps me to get to Bassett a little bit. When I build lineups after this, I think I'm going to end up with a little bit more Bassett than I have Kershaw.
Yeah, I just like the fact that he can get, like, he'll be allowed to go deeper into this game. He is projected for like 30. He's projected for about 30% ownership instead of 21%. That maybe makes me get to a little bit more Kershaw, but I do slightly prefer Bassett just because I think, they project similarly. Bassett has a slight edge there, but also from a range of outcome standpoint, it's risky for both guys, but at least Bassett, that small percentage of the time that he just goes out there and shuts down the Dodgers, he's going to be allowed to go deeper.
All right. So that does it for the early slate. We're about to hit on the late slate. But first, shout out to Prize Picks, the sponsor of today's show. If you guys have not signed up at Prize Picks yet, do it using the promo code AWESOME because you're getting up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit. And why would you not want to take advantage of free money? So sign up using that promo code AWESOME, get up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit, then also get access to all the different tools that we have on the site. They're going to help you over at Prize Picks. We've got Odd Shopper. We've got player prop projections on players, odds go over or under individual props. So that is going to be invaluable when you're making lineups or Prize Picks cards over at Prize Picks. So let's hit on the late slate now. And I'm going to pull up the data now for the main slate because I have all the data for the early slate up right now. And the first game that we have to talk about tonight, it is the Cleveland Guardians against the Baltimore Orioles. And maybe the pitching option that we could feel the best about of any pitcher that we've talked about to this point, Shane Bieber going up against Baltimore. I know he hasn't been quite the same pitcher as he was in the past because the velocity is down a little bit. The strikeout rate is down a little bit coming off shoulder surgery last year, but still 3.36 expected ERA, 25.3% K rate. I feel pretty good about getting to Bieber tonight.
Yeah, same. And again, with it being a 4-game slate, the Orioles are not a weak offense. They have Gunnar Henderson up now, which obviously already homered yesterday, which is cool to see. Adds just another good bat to this offense. They have now gone from, at times this year it was like, the top 5 for the Orioles. Now we're to the top 7. You get, Odor and Mateo at the bottom of the order that are not above average hitters, but everybody else is good. So it's not a cakewalk matchup or anything like that, but still a 3.1 implied run total for the Orioles, a very good pitcher in Bieber. Right now we have him second in top 2 pitcher percentage, getting 45% ownership. I do think it's interesting that he's getting more ownership than Brandon Woodruff against Arizona. Not entirely sure I think that should be the case. I think that they're really similar and should probably be getting about the same ownership, but it's not a huge gap either. So I think that Bieber's either the second or third best option, depending on how you want to view him versus Woodruff.
Yeah, there's a very clear number one option that we're going to be talking about a little bit. That's Spencer Strider going up against the Colorado Rockies. But before we get there, how do you feel about the Baltimore Orioles going up against Shane Bieber? They're projected for very minimal ownership today. And the offensive ownership looks way different on the night slate than it does the early slate because we have much better starting pitchers. So the ownership, we've got a few teams that are going virtually unowned, Baltimore being one of them at just 5% projected ownership.
Yeah, I like the lack of ownership there. I mean, I completely understand why it's the case. You have Atlanta against Cool, you have Boston against Otto, you have Texas against Hill, and then Cleveland's getting some ownership against Bradish, and Milwaukee's getting some against Kelly. All those teams getting more than Baltimore, but I do still like the talent here at no ownership on a 4-game slate. $2,600 Gunnar Henderson, only shortstop eligible, is annoying. He's not even playing shortstop. Hopefully he gets MPE soon, but he's going to make that stack just 1, cheaper, and 2, a lot better. And then, Mullins, Rutschman, Santander are all expensive, but Urias, Mountcastle, Hayes, Henderson, all cheap. It's a team that you can get a lot of upside here and not pay a ton. Clearly it's not a good matchup against Bieber, but I do think they're going a little bit under-owned given the talent level.
Yeah, I mean, if we're looking at the pitchers who are chalky to target against for tonight, so there's Brandon Woodruff, Spencer Strider, and then Shane Bieber. Number one, I think the Orioles have a better offense than Diamondbacks or the Rockies. And then I also think that Shane Bieber could maybe be got to in a way that Spencer Strider maybe can't today. Woodruff probably like close to being on par with Bieber. Yeah. But since the Orioles have the best offense of those 3, this is the single-digit owned offense that I would feel best about getting to in large field tournaments.
Yeah, that's where I'm at as well. It's not that I feel good about getting to them, but if you're asking me Orioles, Diamondbacks, or Rockies, I think it's Orioles, small gap, Diamondbacks, fall off of a cliff, Rockies.
Yeah, same page as me. And then starting for the Orioles, Kyle Bradish is on the mound. And I know there's been a lot of the year where we've looked for some of the potential upside in Bradish. He is good stuff. The strikeout rate of 22.3% isn't bad, but he's been giving up a lot of hard contact this year. He doesn't work all that deep into games. He is going up against the Cleveland Guardians team that does not strike out a whole bunch. So 12% ownership or right around 12% top stack odds. How do you view the matchup of Bradish against Cleveland?
So first, not tolerating your Kyle Bradish slander here. He went like 8 innings against the Astros the other day. That needs to be pointed out. But no, I do think he's a good pitcher. He has had home run issues this year, no doubt about that. 1.7 home runs per 9. 101 expected ISO to lefties is extremely good, 25% strikeout percentage there as well. Righties have gotten to him, 212 expected ISO, 21% strikeout percentage. I am really interested to see what he looks like going forward against righties. I'm pulling it up now, but going from memory, he threw his slider against the Astros like 50% of the time, which was not typical. 51% slider usage against Houston in a excellent start. For context, his average slider usage this year has been 28%. I don't know if that's going to be something that is like a change we see going forward. If it is, I would expect him to be better against righties. Like I said, he's given up a lot of power to righties. He hasn't struck them out as much. But if he improved his slider and he's going to throw it more, that is something that could make him better in the future. For now, I'm still assuming he's going to have some power issues with righties. He's been, again, really good at limiting it against lefties so far. That's not to say you can't play Jose Ramirez, Josh Naylor, but he really hasn't had any issues with lefties this year.
Shout out to Jorge, just left us a super chat, and he's been on fire lately. All kinds of top finishes. And yesterday, 9th in the relay throw. Then 2 days ago, he said 11th in the relay throw. So just left the super chat and say thanks. And we appreciate you, Jorge. Thanks for the super chat. And he's always engaging in Discord channel as well, which we always like to see. And if you guys want access to all the tools we have over at Stokastic.com or access to our Discord channel, you could ask me questions wherever you want, whenever you want. Sign up right now using the promo code MLB Strategy Show, and you'll get 50% off your first week of a Stokastic Plus Platinum package for baseball. We've got the top stacks tool, percentage odds of each individual team to be the highest scoring on the slate, and it also compares them to their ownership projections. So, of course, we've got ownership projections, we've got individual player projections, the top pitchers tool, so each individual pitcher's odds being the top scoring pitcher. It's everything you need to build a winning MLB DFS lineup. So stop guessing, start winning. Join Stokastic Plus today. Here's one thing I'll say about Bradish for tonight's slate. And this isn't exactly the greatest vote of confidence because I'm going to definitely prioritize paying up for Strider, Bieber, Woodruff. If I had to play one of the punt pitchers today, he's easily the choice for me. I'm definitely playing Bradish before I'm playing Rich Hill, Chad Kuhl, or Glenn Otto.
Yeah, I think this is a slate where I'm very, very, very heavy on the Strider, Bieber, Woodruff trio. But yeah, give me Kyle Bradish over Hill, Kuhl, Otto. He's getting less ownership than Hill. I think that he's at worst a solid pitcher that has DFS upside, and at best going to be even better going forward than he has been.
Yeah, I could see Kyle Bradish just based on his stuff, figuring it out going forward. We've seen glimpses of it this year. It hasn't been consistent. Don't be surprised next year if he's an actual real factor on a regular basis for DFS purposes with better strikeout stuff. The Orioles are building a pretty good team. It seems like they know what they're doing, which was not the case in the past, particularly not with pitcher development. I think things are going to start changing for Baltimore.
His plate discipline numbers in that start against Houston were just absurd, especially when you keep in mind that it was the Astros. 16.7% swinging strike percentage, 39.6% chase percentage on pitches out of the strike zone. That's really, really impressive. Obviously, you don't expect that to just suddenly be the case every start, but really good sign if he can just keep doing what he did in that start.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll remember the days. It's different from the times that the Orioles' big pitcher development strategy was not letting them throw their best pitch in minor leagues.
Yeah, and I was talking with somebody on Twitter yesterday about how like people still seem slow to catch on, but because the Orioles were so bad for so long at developing players and it was always, you go to Baltimore and you're just going to suck no matter how good you are. It's the exact opposite now. Like they're taking guys that aren't very good, haven't had success, and making them good. And then you take somebody like Bradish that actually, comes in with some talent. He was like a former fourth round pick. They got him as part of the Bundy trade. And there's no reason to think they're not going to make him a solid pitcher too.
Yeah, they had. So the one that stands out the most, I think, if you guys remember from like 10, 12 years ago or whatever, Jake Arrieta was a top prospect at one point in their organization. I can't remember what the reasoning was, but his best pitcher was a splitter, and they just told him not to throw it.
It was his cutter, and they told him to stop throwing it.
Yeah, and then he just started throwing it again once he got to the Cubs, and it was like, hey, look, he's really good. But for whatever reason, the Orioles were like, no throwing your best pitch.
They did it with Bundy, too. The organizational philosophy was that throwing something along the lines, paraphrasing, obviously, throwing your cutter is like throwing a cutter release-wise and stuff is too similar to a four-seam fastball, and it takes away from developing your fastball. So they would just scrap their cutters. When they drafted Dylan Bundy out of high school, it was like, this guy has the best cutter ever. And they would say, all right, stop throwing that. And then, obviously he had some issues too. Like Gossman was one with the splitter that they were like, oh, we'd rather you just throw fastballs up in the strike zone instead of throwing your splitter. Absolutely just stupid stuff across the board from them. But the exact opposite now, like Austin Voth's the clear example coming over from the Nats after struggling for years. And now he's just legitimately good. And he's just like, oh yeah, they gave me a bunch of data and information that I didn't even know existed and had never seen before. Spencer Watkins, no business being a major league pitcher, kind of average-ish with the Orioles. Like they're taking everybody, making them better. Like Jorge Lopez, cast off, turned all-star closer. Felix Bautista was stuck in A ball, like with Miami and then with the Orioles, and now he's a lights out reliever. They're just making everybody better.
2 games left on the slate to talk about. The next one, the Boston Red Sox and the Texas Rangers. I don't really have interest in either of these pitchers. Rich Hill, 4.25 expected ERA, 19.7% K rate. I get that it's an okay looking matchup on paper against the Texas Rangers, and Texas is also really popular. But Rich Hill right now is picking up too much ownership for my liking. If Rich Hill was going to be an unowned pitcher, I could maybe make a case for him at 15% projected ownership. That's going to be a little bit harder for me to get behind at 7K. I'd rather just find the space to spend like $1,800 more and get up to Strider.
Yeah, I would rather get to just other pitchers, but I also don't really get why he's getting more ownership. He's more expensive than Bradish. He's more expensive than Bradish. He has worse strikeout stuff. He's pretty clearly a worse pitcher. Neither matchup is ideal, but like we said before, if we're paying down, especially at this ownership, I would just rather go to Bradish. I think it's very likely again though that I just end up getting basically those top 3 pitchers. I did want to also touch on Detroit Tigers 44 comment in chat. Very, very salient point. Gunnar Henderson has never played a major league game where he did not hit a home run.
That's true. He's hit a home run now in all one of his major league games. So do that what you will. If he keeps up this pace, he's going to be the best player in a major league history, and he'll break all the home run records that people are denying exist right now on Twitter, which is also totally crazy. But that aside, Texas Rangers, they are currently projected for 19% ownership. I know I said I don't like Rich Hill all that much, but I don't know that I'm going to want to play 19% of the Texas Rangers. By the time I build lineups, I think I'd rather get to some of the other popular offenses that are projected for about similar ownership. Like I'd rather play the Red Sox against Glenn Otto. I'd rather play the Braves against Chad Kuhl. So of the 3 chalk offenses today, I think the Rangers are my least favorite.
Yeah, I think I agree with that as well. Rich Hill's certainly not good, and I do like the Rangers, but we have them going a bit over-owned here. They do also offer a little bit more value, but Boston 15% chance of being the top value stack, Rangers at 24%. Tells me it's probably pretty easy to get to Boston too. So yeah, I like the Braves against Kuhl more. I like Boston against Otto more. It's still a pretty good spot for Texas. Hill, certainly not a great pitcher. 172 expected ISO to righties, 193 to lefties this year. Don't sleep on Corey Seager, even though it's lefty-lefty. He's still got plenty of power, and his price tag has come down a bit. But I do prefer the Boston side, and I do prefer Atlanta.
Yeah, and talking about the Boston side, Glenn Otto, 5.37 expected ERA, 16.9% K rate. Glenn Otto sucks, and the Boston Red Sox offense, while has overall been underwhelming this year, they have everybody healthy right now. They've got JD Martinez, Rafael Devers, Xander Bogaerts in the middle of the lineup. I think the Red Sox should be a little bit better going forward than they have been at other points in the year. And just because Glenn Otto is not a quality starting pitcher, all the ownership on the Red Sox makes sense to me. They've got a 20% projected ownership share, also being 20% top stack odds. This is one of the higher priority offenses of the night.
Agreed. And they're getting healthier too. You have Story back. You have Devers in the lineup. 172 expected ISO to righties for Otto. 193 to lefties. Pitching in Fenway where, right-handed power is going to play really well. Tommy Pham, Xander Bogaerts, JD, Story, all are going to look good. Clearly, Devers always looks good. Verdugo's cheap, hitting second. You can get a couple of bats from Franchy at 2K before they inevitably pinch hit for him. But 1 through 6, I really like Boston.
Yeah, same page there. So that's going to be a team that I like getting to quite a bit. Now, 2 games left to talk about. The next one, this is going to be something easy to talk about. Spencer Strider against the Colorado Rockies. Play him. I don't know what the hell DraftKings has done with his price today, but it's wrong. Spencer Strider is the best pitcher on the slate tonight. I know Brandon Woodruff and Shane Bieber are both really good. Strider's better. 36.7% K rate, 2.61 expected ERA. The Rockies offense is no good. I know they don't strike out a ton against righties. Doesn't matter. Strider is probably going to generate a bunch of swing and misses because he does that against elite offenses. So Strider is the number 1 pitcher to get to today. I'm going to have a ton of him. He's going to be my most rostered player tonight.
I'd be surprised if he's not in every lineup I make because I have no interest in the Rockies anyway. So it's not like with Bieber, I want to get to a lot of Bieber, but thinking through it with it only being a 4-game slate, it's likely I'm just going to have some lineups that don't have Bieber because I also think the Orioles are going on their own. The Rockies, I don't care. I'll just take 100% Strider. I think it's probably more likely than not that I'm like 90+% on Strider here. The price tag is just incorrect compared to the other guys. He has the highest strikeout percentage by a wide margin as a starter this year, 36.1%. Next highest on this slate is Woodruff at 29.6, 2.5 xFIP as a starter. 2/3 of a home run per 9 innings, striking out 31.6% of lefties, 42.6% of righties. You're probably going to get a right-handed heavy Colorado lineup too, because most of their hitters just happen to be right-handed. McMahon, Blackmon, and Toglia, the only left-handed hitters projected in their lineup. This is just a spot where if Spencer Strider struggles, I will be perfectly fine just not making money tonight.
Yep, absolutely the same. And then on the other side of the game, Chad Kuhl's pitching for the Rockies. I have zero interest in him. He is an expected ERA north of 5, only a 16.6% K rate. Of all the offenses we have on the slate today, the Braves have the top stack odds at 21%, or 21.5%. They also have the highest ownership at 23%. So by that metric, a little bit overowned, but it's still obviously an offense to get to. I'm not going to play Chad Kuhl. The Braves offense, along with the Red Sox offense, the two offense I like the most tonight.
Yeah, to me, it's kind of just splitting hairs between those two. Clearly, I like the players in the Braves lineup more than the Red Sox, but they're also a bit more expensive. I do think Kuhl is probably a little bit better than Otto. Not that that's saying a lot. 167 expected ISO to righties this year for Kuhl. Well, not horrible, but not great, especially when you're talking about facing the Braves. 194 expected ISO to lefties certainly sets up well for Matt Olson and Michael Harris. But yeah, Braves look great. Looks like it's supposed to be like 85-ish degrees in Atlanta as well.
Yeah, this is a really straightforward game. Braves offense looks good. Spencer Strider looks good, and that's it. It's the Braves offense, Braves pitching, and probably the highest priority of the slate for me on both sides. Final game on the slate, Milwaukee Brewers, Arizona Diamondbacks. Brandon Woodruff is the last high-end ace that we have to talk about. He had a little bit of a weird season this year, just from the standpoint of he had that nerve issue. He wasn't able to feel his fingers earlier in the year. It created some struggles, but he's back on track now. He's pitched really well in some of his recent outings. And for the year, 3.36 expected ERA, 29% K rate. He's not quite as good of an option as Spencer Strider today, but he's on the next tier with Shane Bieber. And I probably have him as my second favorite pitcher today, a little bit ahead of Bieber. So Woodruff, really high priority pitching option today. I'm mostly going to be focusing my lineups building around with Strider, Bieber, and then Woodruff.
Yeah, so to me, Bieber and Woodruff are functionally the same. The reason that at the moment I think I would slightly prefer Woodruff in tournaments is simply that he's getting 35% ownership while Bieber gets 45%. Right now we have Bieber with a 38% chance of being a top 2 pitcher, 37 going to Woodruff. So again, functionally the same in terms of range of outcomes, projection, all of that, but a little bit more ownership going to Bieber, probably in part because he's $400 less expensive, but I doubt that's going to matter all that much. It is worth noting, I mentioned it obviously with Gunnar Henderson with the Orioles, same type of thing with Arizona. This has been a team all season long where like overall they're below average, but they have a solid 1 through 5-ish, Rojas, Marte, Walker, Varsho. None of those guys are bad, but now they also have Corbin Carroll up, who is one of pretty much consensus, one of the top 3 prospects in baseball right now. You can flip the order around between him and Gunnar Henderson. I think they're actually consensus top 2. But he's really good. So not only is he 2K flat and completely playable in tournaments despite the difficult matchup, but it does lengthen that lineup a bit. It does make it that much more difficult for Woodruff. So, again, not that you're looking and saying, oh, they got Corbin Carroll up, you can't play Brandon Woodruff or anything crazy like that. But it does just add immediately an above average hitter to this lineup and make it a little bit better.
And then the final part of the slate to talk about is Merrill Kelly going up against the Milwaukee Brewers. And Kelly's been good this year from a real life standpoint, not quite as good from a fantasy aspect because he's generally somewhat expensive and then also doesn't generate a lot of strikeouts. Price point is down a little bit today in the mid 8K or the low 8K range. So 3.17 expected ERA, 21.4% K rate. Merrill Kelly is on an island of his own in terms of pricing. So I guess if you're in that point where it's like, I have $8,300 in salary left for an SP2, you're kind of going to land on Kelly by default. But he's not going to be a priority for me. I'd rather spend up for the high-end pitchers, but he is good enough to where I'm not going to really want to prioritize the Brewers offense either.
Yeah, you nailed it with Kelly being on the island. I think I'll probably have some exposure there just because I happen to have lineups where it's just like, all right, well, I can't get to Woodruff or Bieber. I'm not going to just willingly play Bradish or Hill over Kelly if I have the salary. There are strikeouts in the Milwaukee lineup. Kelly is good at limiting power, even though he's not great at getting strikeouts. 140 expected ISO to lefties this year, 115 to righties. He's a solid pitcher, just at a price point where nobody else exists. So I understand why he's getting some ownership there. It's not that you're ever saying, oh yeah, well, I really think Merrill Kelly is a better play than Bieber or Woodruff. It's just that there are some builds where you need that price tag. So like you said, not going out of my way to get to him. Wouldn't be shocked if I end up with less than the field, because it would just mean that I can get to more Strider, Bieber, Woodruff, whatever. But perfectly viable option. As far as Milwaukee goes, ownership coming in about where it should be. I do think that, so like right now we have them with the same, or basically the same top 2 percentage as Texas, and getting less ownership. That makes them kind of interesting to me, just because there is power in this lineup. But like I said, Kelly is very good at limiting power as well.
All right, that is going to do it for us, everybody. Thank you very much for watching. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Later on in the day, we've got MLB Live Before Lock for the 4-game slate, and we also have college football Live Before Lock with Ben Ross and Matt Kajeski. So check out all of that content later on in the day. Other than that, good luck today, and see y'all later.